Our next self-defense planning principle is that of avoidance. Avoidance suggests that when you take in information and you use your sensory input in awareness, that you will then do something with the information when you see something that doesn't look quite right in your world. When that happens, you need to do something with the information, and I suggest that what you do is something discreet, reversible, and non-panicked that moves you further away from the potential attacker and moves you into a safer area if at all possible. We're just going to avoid this threat. We call this, when we do it, tactical avoidance. If you see a dicey-looking character waiting at the top of the stairs in a parking deck stairwell, is there anything that suggests, in your case, that you have to go up those stairs once you've seen him? No. Turn around and take another path. That's an excellent avoidance tool. You can find out an awful lot about your attacker's true intentions and ratchet up your response if you need to with a properly chosen avoidance technique. Let's say you're walking down the street on a sidewalk. There's shops to your right, parked cars to your left. Suddenly you notice, because you're threat scanning, that two guys take a sudden interest in you and quickly move to diagonally cross the street to intersect your position. Well, their destination could be behind you. It could have a completely innocent explanation, but at this moment you don't know. And if you're watching, your sympathetic nervous system ought to give you at least a minor alarm response to make you feel a little strange about this. Don't shut that alarm off and say, it's probably nothing. Do something about it. How about crossing to the other side of the street? If they abruptly change course again to follow you, we then have what the detective boys call a clue, and you can ratchet up your speed, you can change your direction, you can do those sorts of things. If that doesn't work for you, could you step into one of those shops and act like you're shopping? They probably won't follow you inside. If that's not possible for you, could you at least put a parked car between you and them to make sure that you're harder to get at? All of these things are intelligent avoidance techniques. You probably don't want to pull your legally concealed pistol and start blasting, at these folks. It's not called for yet because the threat hasn't been confirmed. So that's avoidance. There's another form of avoidance which we call situational avoidance, where we prospectively avoid situations that we know to be inherently dangerous. So, for example, large crowds of people who drink too much in a public place and can't control their urges. Is that someplace you want to habitually go? Is that someplace you want to go at all? I certainly don't. I've been employed to work in those places as a bouncer, and I know what goes on there. So that kind of place is off my list. How about rallies where people across the street from each other highly charge political beliefs and tensions between them and yelling and shouting and signs being thrown and that kind of stuff? You want to go down there and check it out? Absolutely not. So we avoid that situation in the interest of self-protection. If you want to be an activist about one of those things, send a check from the safety of your own home, but you don't need to be there. In short, I'll just tell you that as far as situational avoidance, you'd be a lot safer as an adult if you stayed out of those places your mother told you not to go when you were younger. So that's avoidance. Our next planning principle is evasion. The main difference between avoidance and evasion is the rate of speed and the confirmation of a threat. When you are under attack, when you believe that the fight is on, your first thought should be not where's my gun, not where's my pepper spray, how do I utilize this martial art? It should be where's my gas pedal, how do I get the hell out of here? When somebody tries to attack you when you're in your parked car stopped at a light and you've left enough room to drive off, why wouldn't driving off be a better choice than fishing around for a gun? For some reason, there are people that persist in teaching classes where you're trying to get your seatbelt off and get a firearm and shoot through the window and shoot while driving and everything else. And I guess that's just a case of what they do for a living. They're kind of gun people. And the old saying, when your only tool is a hammer, every problem begins to look like a nail. So think in terms of leaving the area in the opposite direction with speed as your first line of defense. So that's the evasion part. Evasion is legally required in many cases before you use force in a public place against another person. Now, we have a whole involved legal section on what you may and may not do in the use of force, but almost universally, an attempt to evade trouble is a really good idea from a legal standpoint in just about any culture that you'll find yourself in. So that's evasion. Now, there may be a time or two when you have to use force to be allowed to leave. So if a guy's got you boxed in, you may have to do a palm strike to his face and nose, and while his hands go to his face, you step out and run away. So we call that resistance to facilitate an act of evasion, but we're doing only enough to be allowed to get away. You're not fighting him because you want to win, you're fighting him because you want to leave, and that's completely within the law if it's your only choice. So now we get down to the fourth and final planning principle, which is resistance. And that's the one everybody seems to want to talk about because that's where the cool toys and classes and things come in. If you look on the internet, you can find thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of videos on how to do this particular strike, or how to do this martial art, or how to shoot this way with a gun, how to use a rifle, how to use a shotgun, how to deploy pepper spray. All of those things are important, and yes, you need training in those if you choose to use those resistance techniques. But resistance is way down on the list. It's a last resort, and only when you've been through awareness, avoidance, and evasion. Generally speaking, the need to forcibly resist an attacker in public is the result of an awareness or an avoidance failure. You remember those people I told you I debriefed after a crime and they said that guy came from out of nowhere? There's a smaller group of people and they say, I saw that guy and he looked a little strange to me, but I figured it was probably nothing. And I went on and you know what? That bastard jumped me. Well, guess what? That was an avoidance failure. That wasn't a good judgment. Their alarm system worked and they turned it off. So that's what I mean by a failure of awareness or a failure of avoidance. But you're under no obligation to stand there flat-footed like John Wayne at high noon, and fight it out with a bad guy. As a matter of fact, it's really not to your advantage to do so. In closing, when you think about these four elements, as a private citizen with yourself and your family to protect, and no special authority to pursue or apprehend anybody or to intervene on behalf of other people like a police officer has, no governmental immunity, no selection of weapons, those things. Basically, you're going to have with you what you have based on your lifestyle when you're attacked. And you can't predict this kind of thing. You really can't. You can say, well, I can stay out of bad areas. That's great, but guess what? When you look at the dispersal of violent crime, there are bad areas and there are worse areas. There are no crime-free zones and no crime-free countries. So you can delude yourself into thinking you're in a place where you don't have to practice these things. But the only place you don't is in a secured home. So what I want you to do is, instead of listening to what cops tell you, and I've been a cop for a long time, I also been a bodyguard, professional bodyguard for a long time. And I'm not talking about being a thug who works the door at a rock concert. I'm talking about having protected some fairly high-end people. I'll tell you this. In our training, and when I train my bodyguard students, we talk to them about these four principles. And they become masters of awareness, masters of avoidance, because their job is to keep their client out of trouble, to save them injury, to save them even embarrassment. And when a professional bodyguard stands and fights it out or uses his weapon against an individual in the street on behalf of a client, that may be the last day they ever get a job because it's considered a failure point for them. So, far from being a hero, that's somebody who wasn't good enough at their job to apply the three principles first. And in their world, they call it alert, cover, and evacuate on behalf of the client. They weren't good enough to do those things first, and so they had to try and do something that was less optimal, like shoot it out with somebody, which is never really a good outcome. So, I want you from this point on, as we close this little training today, I want you to think of yourself from this point on as a professional bodyguard. You are simply protecting the most important clients you know, yourself and your family and your loved ones. What could be a more important assignment than that? So remember, awareness first, avoidance of situations that can be avoided, evasion when that has failed or is not possible, and finally resistance only as a last resort. And we can train you in all sorts of tools for resistance and all sorts of techniques, but the thing about that is you can't get all of that just from a video. It's a good starting point, but the more effective the resistance technique, the more training, the more dedication, the more care, and the more responsibility it requires. And anybody who tells you that part's easy is oversimplifying and not doing any favors. So, till next time, I'd like to direct you to our website, which is www.ppisafety.com. That's PPI as in Personal Protection Institute, followed by the word safety, all one word, ppisafety.com. You can send me an email if you have questions. You can look at resource articles there. You can order our private citizen self-defense training manual called Safety Through Strength, and you can get a copy emailed to you, or you can get one in hard form, which is a soup to nuts training manual, which goes over starting at the beginning and ends up at the end with resistance tools. So remember, until next time, stay alert and stay safe.